Grant Davey is from the Ashley Rakahuri Rivercare Group, and he's our last presenter of the day. He's going to be doing basically a slideshow, movies, a little bit of both, on the Ashley Rakahuri.
Yeah, actually, I'm the third citizen scientist, but what I'm mainly doing is showing photos, so maybe it doesn't count. There is a bit of meat at the end, though. The original aim of this presentation was to tell some photographic stories about the birds that live on the Ashley, to show some of their interesting behaviour that you can only see if you go out there a lot. These are the birds that the Rivercare Group is formed to look after, and it's a reminder just how special these places are. Then I expanded to look at two of the issues these birds face. So the first little story is about wrybill. Without particularly trying, at the start of last season, we saw 6 of the potential 11 banded wrybill that would be going up the river to nest. We saw them down at the estuary, and there's 2 of these which are really interesting. The first one on the left is BWBW. He was banded on the river in 2010, and Nick has been monitoring him nesting in very much the same place ever since. I think maybe 1 year he was missing. The second one is KIYG, which was banded just a couple of years ago. This is KIYG's first nest of the season, and that's what happened to it. Harrier got the eggs. This is the second nest of the season. It was 50 metres away, and the chicks hatched from that, went down to the river and disappeared within a matter of, I suppose, a few days, and I lost sight of KIYG. I thought she'd given up and left the river. So that's 2 nests. So I was very surprised to go back there on the 5th of January and see her with chicks from a 3rd nest. I never did find that nest, but it would have been very close by to the first 2. The year before, a bird lost its eggs to a harrier very close to here and came back and nested in exactly the same nest. But 5 days later, I went down to the estuary and there she was. So where are your chicks? I went back to that same place and there was no wrybills there. She'd nested 3 times and lost a lot. These are chicks in that same little part of the river, and I don't know if any of these actually survived, and I think cats is a big problem in that little part of the area. But elsewhere, further up the river, the situation isn't so bad. These birds aren't so bad off as the black-fronted tern. It's a little story about bird aggressiveness. When those wrybill move up the river, they can expect to fight for the territory a little bit, even though they do generally seem to come back to pretty much the same area each year. Same with banded dotterel. I'd still chase harrier and go for it. Black-fronted tern are also good at this, and they sometimes head off harriers before they get to their nests. I quite often see wrybill chasing stilts, and I really don't know why. They expend a whole lot of effort after chasing after a bird, which I don't think can do their chicks any harm. The most aggressive bird we see on the river to its own species and to other species is the black-billed gull. This little pied stilt chick was relentlessly chased for about 100 metres, picked up repeatedly and dropped on the gravel, picked up from the river, dropped in the water, and astonishingly, when it got to the far side, it just started feeding along the edge of the water. At one stage it played dead. I picked it up thinking it may be dead, and it got up and ran off again. I should have left it alone. And all the shouting I did at these bloody black-billed gulls didn't work. But this is not such a good story. This little black-fronted tern chick was hatched too close to a black-billed gull colony. It was picked up, killed and dropped. And that was just sort of misguided protection of their own chicks or nests. But harriers, in this case, this aggression is absolutely justifiable. Harrier with a black-billed gull chick. But the black-billed gull are just not very good at getting up there and chasing the harriers before they come. They're very good at chasing them after they've done their damage. And the black-fronted tern are the only bird we see to physically attack people on the Ashley. You have to disturb them to monitor their nests and find out what is going on. And in my experience, they always come back if they're disturbed during the day. Drying riverbed. In late January, the river went dry for actually a little bit more than 6 kilometres at one stage. And this is purely due to lack of rainfall. When water flow at the gorge goes below about 1.6 cumex and stays like that, the river goes dry down here. And this was the longest period, if the records are reliable enough, this is actually the longest period since 1972. For a while there, these pools were absolutely full of life. You don't normally see this sort of thing, so many species and so many individuals clustered together in such a small place. There was a ryebilder there a little bit earlier. A black-backed gull came by a little bit later. This pool 100 metres away was just, photo doesn't do it justice, I should have videoed it. It was just absolute hive of activity. And these spoonbills, you normally see 1 or 2 in a flood, and you sometimes see some when the river dries out, but there was 15 there at this stage. And about 15 herons, a whole heap of black-billed gulls. This is some different wildlife in a pond. I think this was actually a bit of a publicity exercise. I don't think it really can achieve much. The only species which was affected by the flood, the drought, the lack of flow at this time of year was the black-billed gull. They progressively walked their chicks, marched their chicks upstream to follow the water. The first time they did it, I didn't see it, but I saw a bit of evidence on trail cameras. The second time they shifted, I was there. I'd been going out every morning to look at them as I live, only less than a kilometre away from there. They usually scattered along about an acre of gravel beside the river, but this time the river had dried out to just above where they'd been. And they were all clustered together into a very tight creche. And I watched them for about 20 minutes. And firstly, 1 or 2 adults started walking upstream quite fast with their chicks, and then the whole lot got going. It's an extremely impressive thing, which I don't expect to ever see again, but they were organised and systematically herded and guided. I haven't got any sound to it, but that doesn't matter. So that's what you do when you need to move your chicks. You fly in the air to get them to go faster. The black-billed gulls are by far the most interesting bird to watch, I think, and to photograph because of all their behaviour. Feeding can be quite messy, probably can be quite painful. These little fish will have come out of one of those ponds, those drying ponds. But most of the food they get comes off the paddock surrounding. That's regurgitated worms, and everybody's about to pile on. And I think we had a captioning competition for all of these photos. There's just so much character, or maybe imagined character, being displayed with these birds. And the terns are also very interesting to watch. So these ones were collecting worms off a clover paddock about 1 kilometre away from the river. They take them back to the colony, often seem to wash them in the water before serving them up. We see fish, cicadas and small insects as well as worms. Other rivers you see lizards, but I've never seen them with a lizard here. An interesting thing, when they catch a big fish, they seem to brag about it. They carry it around all over the sky, show it to everybody, sit round beside the water and take it back to the chick who finds it's far too big to eat. This fledgling came so close I didn't think that I was going to be able to focus on it. These little episodes, I did have a video, but I cut it out. They last a few seconds, well, a second probably, to feed, and then the chick's begging for more with a very loud chirping noise. This is something really quite odd, which I really don't think I'll ever see again. The bird on the nest was given a worm 9 minutes earlier than this by its mate, and it profited to a passing non-breeding adult which was flying up the river. It just held it out, hey, have this. And that bird came down, mucked around a bit, carried the worm away. It can't have been breakfast time yet. There's 2 chicks under it. But that non-breeding adult repaid that favour by coming back 3 times and bullying those little chicks. Bird disturbance, another little story. We've got deer tracks all down the river, probably right down to the estuary, and it's perfectly possible that 2 or 3 of them out on a black-fronted tern colony could cause abandonment. There is a black-billed gull colony in the background there, but they weren't that particularly worried. But we do have giant hares, and from what I've seen, they're by far the biggest source of nighttime disturbance of the black-fronted terns. Only once have I seen a bird not come back after being disturbed like this, but it had been disturbed 6 or 7 times prior to that over a few nights. So on our section of the river, 4-wheel drives are really a rarity, and this is the only one I saw last season. There are some tracks around, but it basically isn't a massive problem anymore. And that is because with ECAN, we block off most of the accesses to the river. We have signs and education, agreements, dock investigate when something goes badly wrong, which hasn't happened for a few years now, and publicity really deters them from coming out. But we still do have motorbikes and quad bikes. That bottom scene, an ECAN ranger who's here, astonishingly got them to divert from around where the terns are actually nesting. But Crate Day was a different story. There's about 170 4-wheel drives going from above the area we normally work on up to the gorge. This is half of Judith Huey's tiny but really quite effective little protest. That is actually really quite impressive to watch. It looks dangerous, but it isn't. Those things coming at you loud and noisy is really quite frightening, and I think we could have a bit more of this because to a significant extent, I think it actually worked. This is a turned-eye view of 4-wheel drive disturbance. 2 kilometres up from that video place and where the protesters were, I'd previously gone out and found nests. I went back there thinking that all the 4-wheel drives had already gone to check the damage and map in the 4-wheel drive tracks. The damage wasn't as bad as you might think. There was 2 nests and 2 eggs and 2 nests, broken by flying stones and a few distressed-looking chicks and that sort of thing. But later on, this colony grew quite massively. But when I was up there, this came down the river. So some of these people are a bit feral. Most of them actually aren't. Most of them are fairly reasonable people, which Judith and her fellow protester and the doc and the ECAN and the police could talk to. And we are making progress because one of the main organisers of this event is saying that they won't be organising it anymore during the nesting season. We'd prefer they weren't there at all, and we do expect that some will come back. But the reality is there's something a whole lot worse than 4-wheel drives, and that is Norway rats in our part of the river, or parts of our part of the river anyway. So trail cameras and traps have shown in the last 5 years that they're by far the most important predator of eggs and chicks at the nests. More often black-fronted tern than anything else, but also wrybill and black-billed gull and banded dotterel. Second worst predator is almost certainly cats. You don't see them at the nest that often, but chicks disappearing away from the nest, the most obvious culprit is cats. This is what Norway rats have done. The black-fronted tern fledgling productivity per nest plummeted after they arrived. They suddenly appeared in numbers in 2018. It went down to about 1 fledgling per 10 nests. Last season, it actually came up quite a lot. I haven't actually plotted that yet, but that was because the terns nested in areas where there were no Norway rats, and they were actually areas we don't have trap lines. But this is something that Nick found on a river cleanup day, and it turned out to be a Norway rat feeding burrow. They were burrowing under these discarded butchered animal remains and eating them from below. So I put a few traps there. I'd caught 3 or 4, or something like that, rats, which wasn't that impressive. But there was a homeless man living in his Volvo with 2 dogs there, and he told me that across the track there was another dead animal. So this is sort of right on the riverbank among gorse and broom. So I went and started putting traps there, and 30 Norway rats were caught in total, including the few across the track. They just kept coming until there was none left, as shown by there were none left in the traps, and trail cameras were showing none. And if we can find colonies like this and deal to them there, we can really make a difference. There's 2 maps joined together here. The top one is a month ago. And this area had been, I'm sure, a area of discarded animal remains, carcasses of sheep and deer and pigs and fish for a very long time, probably for decades. And in 2019, we had a 48 nest black-fronted tern colony, the orange dots just to the south of there. That was going swimmingly until I came back after 2 days away, and the eastern 2/3 of that colony was deserted. And I went to the nearest trap and there was a Norway rat. I caught 16 Norway rats in that place, and they will have come off the berm up there. And after they'd done for the terns, they then started on the black-billed gulls and took more than 100 of their chicks. You could find the partially eaten bodies just right by the colony. So down the bottom there are some really interesting figures. Since 2017, we'd had trap line both sides of the river and running all along through this northern part of this entire image. In the last 5 years, those traps, which are mainly Dock 200s, checked every 2 weeks, caught 2 Norway rats. We caught a total of 22 out on the river, sort of nest protection traps, around this 2019 colony and a 2022 one, which partially overlapped it. And when we actually targeted where the rats were, it's a total of 33. The trap lines didn't even show us we had a problem, let alone deal with it. So our traps aren't working, so we called in the experts in terms of Leona Kirk and her 2 dogs. And it was very clear that they can find the rats. It's also equally clear that having them there for 2 or 3 days, maybe once or twice in a nesting season, just doesn't cut it. So we needed to do more. So we got our own pet dog who was bred to be a detection dog and had some rat training. And my wife has carried on with that training. Obviously, in the nesting season, she can't be running around out there. She's going to have to be on the leash. This is some of her work at the road bridge, around the road bridge area at Rangiora. All over the place, lots of times. We'd had black-fronted tern colonies in 2021 and 2022 there, which were hard hit by rats. One of the reasons we've figured out now that the rats are there is that there's pigeons breeding and nesting and roosting under that bridge, and it's drawing in the rats. So we've done for 14 out there when I didn't actually expect any outside the nesting season from previous experience with traps and trail cameras. So that is actually really quite significant. This is what happens when she finds evidence of a rat, and it's totally unmistakable, although I think she's found mice on a couple of occasions too. So I had to go away and get a mattock to help her, but we got 4 rats out of there, an adult and 3 young ones. She caught the adult, I stomped on the young ones. I think if we do this sort of thing and find those colonies, we can actually really totally minimise this Norway rat problem. One thing I didn't say, and I asked a question of Anthony earlier, what sort of rats they had. They have ship rats and Norway rats out on the river. We only have Norway rats based on 4 or 5 years of trapping and trail cameras. So outside the nesting season, when we've got enough money, we can find a rat with a dirty great loader. But you have to, otherwise, seeing the logs are usually so big they're hiding under, can take weeks for rats to go into traps or to take poison. So we can now find these places. It's a matter of dealing with them. So we've been trying to smoke them out so we can humanely stomp on them as they come running out. I don't know if that's going to work. The stomping will work, but whether we can actually get them out is another matter. So we went back to that area of discarded dead animals with Evie, and she immediately found that disgusting sight. It didn't take much finding, but she did see it first. And with these pigs and deer carcasses about 5 metres away. Right there was a family of cats, harriers, and 1 Norway rat in a burrow. Those cats and that Norway rat are no longer with us. So we decided to sort of systematically look at this area, and I walked those red lines, apart from in the pine trees, and Evie, she did the green lines, and I had to go off and see what she was up to sometimes. We didn't find any more evidence of rats. It's a bit early in her detection career to be sure about this, but I'm pretty sure that if there was a major concentration of them, we would have found them. What we did find was more dead animals, partly pigs, one place, fish, deer, sheep, a cow, all of this sort of thing. And I put trail cameras at the more likely places, and I haven't seen a rat in weeks. And I think we've temporarily done for them here. And I'm wondering whether this place, which is a bit unique on the river for the amount of dead animals around, could perhaps have seeded the rat problem elsewhere in the river. And hopefully the black-fronted tern nest and the other birds nest to the south of here this season. And I think if they do, they actually should be okay. Got another tool in our arsenal against Norway rats just over the last few months. So it's funded and arranged by ECAN. We've got 150 Pindone bait stations put along where the most sign of Norway rats was. But unfortunately, I've seen very few Norway rats in about 30 trail cameras along there. Lots and lots of mice. We must have killed absolutely thousands of them. Whether that will do any good or not, I don't know. But those places are drawing in the mice so much that it's drawing in the other predators. The mice really love this Pindone stuff. We do a lot of work there, but we need to do a lot better. And this can only happen if our plan to hire a full-time professional comes about. We need more people out on the river who know what they're doing. And I can say this because I'm just a citizen scientist, but otherwise we might be pushing shit uphill. Yeah, we've got a real mouse boom. In May, I think it was, in our Dock 200 traps, we actually caught more mice than anything else. And mice are not supposed to be caught in Dock 200. Some of them have been set a bit light, but the bloody things, they climb up the wall of the trap and treat the box and treat the trap like it's a trampoline. And they run in and out and in and out. So they're actually, if you're trying to catch the predators for the birds out in the river, they're a bit of a nuisance. I haven't seen it. ECAN are very well aware of this and quite fairly proactive. I understand that the last time there was a hunting competition at the Ashley pub, which is, I don't know, 800 metres away from this area, an ECAN ranger went out and told them not to do this. And ECAN spend quite a bit of time burying dead animals like this. Well, we probably do need a big sign up, but it'll get ignored. And we did have, I think it was a front page story in the local newspaper telling about this sort of thing. Yeah, we're trying to raise money, which will probably have to be something like $100,000 a year to have someone not only to do trapping, but monitoring, following gravel extraction, weeds, the whole deal. Because really at the moment, as for work out on the river, it's only Nick and me, and it doesn't cut it. So we've really only just started. We've spoken to ECAN, who seem to be really quite keen on the idea, and perhaps next year they can do some funding. But without that, well, we don't last forever. And we have lots of good trappers who check the traps every 2 weeks. But as for getting out on the river and doing the monitoring and hunting the rats and that sort of thing, it doesn't happen.